ended up in the middle of Imam Yasin, in the middle of this holy site, not knowing what it was, but visually taking it in. I thought, okay, now I know why I'm here. China's an enormous country, and in a way, when you get to Beijing, you think, I have to go see the Great Wall, I have to go to all these places that you've heard about. But as an artist, I wanted to continue the work I was making, and I really always try and not make photographs that I've seen before. And so I hope with this work that I've achieved that. But it's very important for me as a student and as a young photographer. I made photographs that I saw. And then eventually I wanted to try and make photographs that I hadn't seen. I used photography a lot to explore ideas of intimacy. So I wanted to see if I could capture a feeling on film. So although I tried out many different ways of photographing, from journalism to street photography to large format photographs, working with an 8x10 camera, ultimately what I became interested in was if I could capture ideas of intimacy. A friend of mine was shooting Kill Bill, the Quentin Tarantino film, in Beijing, and they invited me to go to China because they had plenty of space and they thought I would be interested in photographing. And this was 2002. When I went there, I read about Western China and the Taklamakan Desert, and I read a sentence that said ancient city ruins in the desert landscape, and I thought, okay, I think I'm going to go here. The first time that I went to Western China, I knew nothing about the shrines. It's almost embarrassing, but I knew what I read in my Lonely Planet guide, which was basically the sentence that got me out there was ancient city ruins in the desert landscape. I had read about the Taklamakan, I read about the Uyghur people. It was very interesting to me that there was a population of 10 million people in one of the largest regions of China, which I didn't know at the time, that I had never heard of. So there was this enormous desert that I had never heard of, and there was a huge population of people that I hadn't heard of. So I thought that was unusual. And so whatever I read about this region, the mosques, the minarets, I just thought this is the place that I need to go. And I think intuitively, it was more intuitive than anything else, I felt there was something out there that I had to see. Well, I realized also if I was going to go into the desert, I couldn't just go into the desert. It was very far, and I needed a car. If I went by bus or train, I couldn't stop. So I thought, I'm going to have to do something, and I met a young Chinese tour guide in the city of Urumqi, and I spent an afternoon with him taking a tour around the city, and then I went to his home and I met his family so I could use their internet. And I knew he was a safe person to travel with, and I asked if he would help me get into the desert. And that is how I ended up in this holy site. The young man that organized the trip for me into the desert, they hired a Hui driver, and the Hui are a Chinese Muslim. And although we didn't speak the same language, the driver was very sensitive to the places that I would ask them to stop so I could get out and photograph. And I think after enough days of seeing what I was interested in, he on his own decided to take me to this holy site. But nobody told me what it was. They just kind of drove to the edge of the desert at one point and said to get out and walk. So I got out and I walked, and I thought, okay, I don't know where I am, but I did see that the path was worn in the sand. And so I just followed the path, and I began to see these wooden cribs. And they looked like rafts in the ocean, but it was desert sand instead of waves. And I mean, I really see a strong, as many people do, correlation between the ocean and the desert. I chose not to include people in the photographs because the first experience that I described to you about walking into the desert and seeing a marker and being moved by it, I wanted to capture that moment. The Uyghur people are Turkic as opposed to Chinese. They're considered a Chinese ethnic minority group. They speak a Turkic language. Historically, they speak a language called Chagatai. They still write in Chagatai. It's one of the earliest written Turkic languages, if not the earliest written Turkic languages. And the Uyghurs Islam came into this region around the 10th century. So there were all these different religions that existed in various parts, never throughout the entire region. And you also had later you had the ancient Silk Road. So it was a region that was always rich in cultures, and the Uyghur people are very open. And you can see how they absorb so many different religions and languages into the culture that exists today. that we know of as Uyghur Islam. Historically, the form of Islam that was practiced, which is Sufism, really took root across the entire region. And what that meant is that there were Sufi orders in every village. So when you go to a holy site, you're going to a site for a saint. And often the saint is known to cure something specific. Sometimes it's a more general saint. But for example, you may have a saint for fertility. If women are having trouble getting pregnant, or if they're having miscarriages, they might go for a few days with other women to a fertility site. And there they carry out various rituals and praying in order to have children. There is a site for people that have problems with their feet. And so often people say, oh, we have that in Catholicism too, and it's true. People will come to the site and at most of the holy sites, there's a sheikh, who's a guardian of the mazar, and again, it can be a man or a woman. It's often handed down to them through centuries of their family being part of this mazar. Also, at a lot of the holy sites, you'll have what we would consider a cemetery, a burial ground. It's believed that the saint actually is in a state of eternal sleep and helps the dead transition into the afterlife. So it's important to many people when they're buried to be buried close to a saint. And what that also means is on Fridays in certain villages, after people visit the mosque, men visit the mosque, they will go to the holy site and pray for their relatives and also pray at the tomb of the saint. And usually they will pray for everybody that's in this area. And the markers for individual people are also as intricate and special as the marker for the saint, but it's smaller. There is no map that leads to the Tomb of the Saints. There's no road, there's no signs. So you have to kind of know where it is. And it's known by word of mouth. How does one find the holy sites? How does one find the tombs? It would be very difficult. You would have to speak to people and kind of ask them how to get there, but then you would need to know the names. So in 2004, a historian that I had met when I was traveling in 2002, he and I decided we would travel together. In his studies, he came across a book, and this book is a hagiography. It's a Uyghur hagiography, and it's a guidebook to the tombs of saints. And I believe it's a miracle, actually, that this book was published in 2001, because without it, I don't know what we would have found. And the book has about between 80 to 100 different holy sites listed in it, and every few pages there's a small photograph of the holy site and a little drawing, and it tells a little bit about the history of the site, why you might go there, and approximately where it is. But it's never go to this village, make a right, make a left, and you'll find the holy site. Getting to the shrines often took a lot of time, so it was so important for me to photograph at sunrise or sunset, at dawn and dusk, because that's when the most beautiful light happens. Whenever I traveled with someone, I taught them one of my favorite photographic terms, which is magic hour, and it's that time when the light sort of paints the earth. If we could get to 2 places in one day, that would be great. Or sometimes we would just spend the whole day and wait for sunset to come. and photograph throughout the day at one site. The markers vary in size. The large markers are typically for a saint. The greater the saint is and the more miracles a saint is known to have performed, the larger their marker is. And frequently for family members, the markers might be in scale of the human body, or as small as just one twig, or multiple pieces of wood tied together. And so usually the saint markers are much larger, and the ones for people are varying in size, but never that large. The most basic marker that you'll have is just mounds. Although the person is buried deep under the earth, there's still a mound above to mark where they are. And it seems anonymous, but everybody knows who's where. There might be a marker that has nothing to do with the burial. So some of the markers, there's something called Tur Alim, which is a branch and a flag. So someone may go on pilgrimage and they'll bring Tur Alim with them, and they'll put the post into the earth, and that will mark their prayer or their wish on their pilgrimage. You'll also have these wooden kind of what I call crib markers that might be around a mound, or just may mark where somebody is buried, or may mark where a saint is. Sometimes a saint is actually buried someplace, and sometimes it's just symbolic that the saint's spirit has traveled there. Whatever the case is, the wooden crib will mark off that area, and then around it or to it, people will attach flags. Sometimes you'll see often, or sometimes there is a ritual sacrifice, so that a bird or a lamb, somebody may bring a goat or a sheep on pilgrimage, and the animal will be sacrificed in a ritualistic way and shared, cooked and shared. The food is shared with all of the pilgrims as a form of charity and generosity. You'll also have something, you'll have a tomb marker, as there are a couple here that are in mausoleums. You may have bricks. Some parts of the desert, it's not that easy to find wood, and so people use the bricks that are used to build homes, which are handmade bricks, to create a structure. Sometimes it has a human figure-like shape, or another shape to it, and so they will use bricks and muslin to tie the bricks together. And rocks and string, if somebody wants to get married, they'll take two rocks together and tie string around it. So you'll often see these small piles of rocks with strings tied around them. 3 rocks with string is the wish for a child. The mosques in this region are pretty much controlled by the government. So there are certain times they're open and certain times they're closed. There's an age limit. If you're under the age of 18, it's forbidden to go to mosque. The Mazar have more freedom tied to them. So I think throughout the Cultural Revolution, the Mazars were seen more as superstition, and there was sort of less control of the Mazars. The main issue has to do with many people coming together. So when you have thousands of pilgrims going on pilgrimage, that's when the site becomes more, there's more concern around how a site is used. So that I've seen a lot of change in the 10 years that I've worked in this region, and it was at times surprising, where I would return to a site and it might be gone, or a practice that was part of weekly, there might be a weekly zikr, would now, unfortunately, is no longer being practiced. So you might find out that it was now forbidden to have a zikr on Friday. I don't completely understand the politics behind that, but I have seen a lot of change. I recently attended a conference at SOAS on the Islamic soundscape of China, and I was kind of shocked and saddened to hear that the Imam Yasin pilgrimage that happens every May is now banned. And apparently there's another holy site that people have moved to, but this one was so important and so rich and just full of culture that I was surprised it wasn't turned into a site of that would be sanctioned by the government as something that should be kept and maintained. And so there's a lot of change happening. I don't know if people understood what I was doing. I came in as an artist making this work. So I wasn't necessarily coming in to tell a quick story and leave. So I don't know that there was a strong relationship to photography in general. And certainly I don't know that there was a strong relationship to art photography, museums. So I would say that I don't think people really knew or understood what I was doing, and I don't think it mattered. I think people were mostly interested in having an interaction. Because I didn't sort of show up with a camera and just start photographing. My camera was usually away, and so it was really about building a relationship. And as a foreigner, it was important to just sit with people and talk with them. And then Alex or Rahila or whoever I was traveling with, we would talk about why we were there. And mostly it was about the interest in learning more about the site. And so then people understood what we were doing from that level, that it was a level of interest in their practice, in the saints. when I returned, I always made it a point to go back to people and give them photographs. In the end, that turned out to be problematic because it was confusing. Not to the people, but I went back to a site that was no longer there, or it was being rebuilt, and part of it was no longer in existence. And I was looking for the person that welcomed us there, the sheikh who welcomed us there. And when we came with a photograph and we were looking for him, people got uncomfortable, and the police came and tried to find where we were in the village and how we made these photographs. And although I had made the photographs about 3 years before, they thought I just made them. And they were very worried that I was a journalist. And so bringing the photographs back turned out to be more problematic than it was helpful. And it was hard to explain that with such a big camera that I wasn't a journalist and that I wasn't coming in to try and tell this specific kind of story. And it became very important for me to not make a body of work that was about the politics of the region. That's another body of work, but because I worked with so many local friends, so many Uyghurs that were from the region, I thought it was very important that I make the work that I came to make about the holy sites and sharing this part of the culture, and to keep them protected and safe. I thought I'm going to stay away from creating a body of work that specifically becomes critical of the politics of the region. As many Han Chinese, both from China and New York, have seen this work, there's been an extremely high interest in learning more about Uyghur culture that goes far beyond the narrow vision that we've seen in the media of who the Uyghurs are. So I'm looking forward to seeing this work going back to China and creating a dialogue between just for everyone in different communities to learn more about the Uyghur and to see another perspective.